You're good.
Okay, I will call the special meeting of council to order at 9:01 a.m. And looking for a motion from council to confirm the agenda that the council of the Township of North Huron hereby accept the agenda for March the 26th, 2021 special council meeting as presented. Do I have a mover of that? I have Councillor Heffer moving, and I have Councillor Van Hittersum seconding. Is there any questions on or anything else anybody wants to note on on the agenda? Not seeing any. Carson, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Reeve Sight. So Councillor Falconer. Councillor Falconer, you were just muted there.
Yes.
Councillor Heffer.
Yes.
Councillor Van Hittersum.
Yes.
Councillor Palmer.
Yes.
Councillor McBurney.
Yes.
Deputy Reeve Sight.
Yes.
And Reeve Bailey.
Yes.
So that motion carries 7-0.
Okay. Any member of council want to disclose a pecuniary interest? None noted. So we have a delegation today, and this is from Lisa Courtney from BM Ross and Associates regarding the development charges 101. I will now turn it over to Lisa. Lisa.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, or Deputy Reeve. I'm just going to get my screen going. Right, everybody see D1 begin slide? Perfect. All right, thank you for having me. It's good to see everybody this morning. Hopefully it's not too long before we can see people in, public again, but we're on our way. So, hopefully maybe by the end of the development charge process, I'll be there in front of you in person in Wingham. So today's session is a development charge 101 session. This is our education presentation about development charges. So it's meant to be either a refresher for those of us who are familiar with development charges, or kind of a crash course for people who maybe haven't dealt with development charges before. So I'm going to go over what development charges are, the rules around them, and then I'll get into how we calculate development charges and implement a new development charge bylaw. I'll talk about development charges in North Huron, so where we're at currently, and then talk about what we need and need to do for the 2021 process. And then I'm going to talk about community benefit charges as well. You may recall back in 2019, the province introduced Bill 108, which is the More Homes, More Choice Act. And as part of that act, they had made some major amendments to development charges. And one of those major amendments was the inclusion of this new type of charge called community benefits. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview into what community benefit charges are after I'm done talking about development charges. So development charges are a tool that's available to municipalities to recover capital costs. And you see I've highlighted and bolded capital costs there, associated with infrastructure and services that are put in place that benefit future growth. So this could be a new project. So let's say you have to put in a new well to service a new area of town. That would be something you could recover costs for through development charges. Or if you've already done some work that benefits future growth and you want to recoup costs associated with that work you've already done. The general idea of development charges is that growth pays for its share, so that your existing taxpayers aren't bearing the brunt of putting in new services and new infrastructure for new growth. One thing to remember about development charges is that they apply only to capital costs. You cannot collect development charges related to costs associated with operating or maintaining infrastructure or services, okay? So when I talk about, what operation and maintenance costs are, if we think about replacement, repair, maintenance, or operation type projects, you cannot collect for those through development charges. So let's say you want to resurface an asphalt road that's already asphalt, you wouldn't be able to collect for that through development charges. If you want to replace your fire truck and you're essentially replacing like for like, you can't collect for that through development charges. If you add a fire truck to your fleet, you could potentially collect for that through development charges. Say you want to widen a road, so you're going to add 2 lanes to an existing 2-lane road. You could collect for that through development charges. An example of that is Suncoast Road in Goderich. Back in the day, it was only 2-lane. There was identified a need for more lanes on that road to accommodate more traffic as a result of growth. So they were able to collect a portion of that project through development charges because it benefited future growth. So when we think about development charge projects, it's important to remember, is this a capital cost or is this maintenance, operation, repair? And how does it benefit or service new growth? Those are the things you want to think about when we're thinking about development charges. So we collect development charges from new residential and non-residential growth. You cannot collect development charges from any existing growth. Your development charges are based on a capital works plan or projects that are included in your development charge background study. So whatever is in your background study is what your development charges are. And there's lots of rules around what types of projects can be included in development charges and how we calculate development charges. And really the whole exercise in figuring out development charges is a real fun mix of accounting, planning, and engineering. Everybody's, most 3 favorite professions, I'm sure. But it really helps forecast, future growth in the area and bring it all in together. Any money you collect for development charges has to go towards development charge projects. And the last bullet point on this slide is really important. The development charges are ultimately set by council. So it's my job to calculate development charges. I will calculate what's reasonable and fair based on the information I'm provided and what projects are eligible. So I will calculate your ceiling essentially, and you as council can charge at that ceiling or you can charge at a lesser amount. It's ultimately council's decision. So we calculate development charges for residential and non-residential growth. We split them out so that residential growth isn't paying for non-residential growth's share and vice versa. Typically, you'll see residential development charges as an amount per unit. So it might be, $4,000 for a single family dwelling and then $3,500 for an apartment. Usually different types of units are a proportion of what a single family dwelling is, just based on how many people typically occupy those types of dwellings. Non-residential development charges are typically charged out on a per square foot or per square meter basis for new commercial, industrial, and institutional growth. Another thing that's important to keep in mind about development charges is that where you have specific projects that benefit specific areas, you will have specific development charges. So this is often why we see different development charges in urban areas versus rural areas of a municipality. Typically, your urban areas have water and wastewater systems, and you may have a development charge project for like a new pumping station in that community. So only the people who live in that community benefit from that project. So you only collect development charges from that area that benefits. So this is often why we see different development charges in different areas of the municipality. So historically in North Huron, the development charges have aligned with the wards. So there's been a Wingham development charge, a Blythe development charge, and an East Wawanosh development charge. And this just reflects the projects that are being done in those different areas. So in Wingham, there's been a sewage project included. So that benefits the people in Wingham or the future growth in Wingham. So it's only collected within Wingham. In Blythe, there's a well project. Again, it only benefits the folks in Blythe. So it's only collected in Blythe. Where I live here in Kinloss, we actually have 6 different development charges, just based on the different services and projects that are provided in the different areas of the township. Just a hypothetical example in the future, say the township wants to extend water and wastewater servicing into Hutton Heights, and they want to include those costs into development charges, there would be a Hutton Heights specific development charge. Same with if there was a project in Belgrave, there would be a Belgrave specific development charge. So the requirement to have area specific development charges comes out of the Development Charge Act. It's a rule that's in there so that it's the rationale is to try and be as fair as possible so that only the people who benefit pay for it. Generally, the amount of a development charge is reflective of what projects are being done to service or that benefit new growth. So where you have higher development charges, they're doing more projects or they're doing bigger projects. One place where we're working currently is in Lucan. Lucan is definitely a growing place. Back when we could travel, anybody who went to London and drove through Lucan saw all the new houses going up. And they're actually getting to the point where they're getting close to their sewage treatment plant capacity. So they're looking at putting on a major expansion to their sewage treatment plant. And that sewage treatment plant expansion will be included in their development charges, and it will make their development charges go up significantly. And that is purely a reflection of their need to service new growth. One thing to remember about development charges too is that when we have projects in development charges, you may not be collecting for the entire cost of the project. It all depends on the project. If we think about a water tower, so again, here where I live and here on Kinloss, they put in a new water tower in Ripley. Ripley never had a water tower before. So of course, this new water tower services the existing population of Ripley, and there's some capacity in that tower for new growth as well. But we can only collect the portion of that water tower costs associated with future growth through development charges. So we're only getting a piece of the pie of the total cost of that project. And that proportion that you collect for a project through development charges will depend on the project itself. There may be some projects where you can collect 100% of the costs because it's totally driven by future growth. And there may be others where it's maybe 10% or 25%. It all depends on the project. So the rules we have to play by when it comes to development charges comes from the Development Charges Act. So it sets out what types of projects we can collect for, how we calculate them. And importantly, it sets out that you have to do this exercise every 5 years. So your development charge bylaw will expire, and when it expires, it is dead. You cannot renew it, you cannot make it go a little longer. You have to have a new one in place. And before you can have a new one in place, you have to do a background study. And the background study looks at growth and it looks at the projects, and it's basically an exercise in reviewing things because we want to make sure that the projects that are included are going to get done, that the costs are reasonable and realistic, and if there's any changes to project costs, so say, you had a project in there and you've got a grant, great, but we have to subtract that grant off the total project cost. So that's something that would get updated in the next development charge background study. The Development Charge Act has been in place since 1989, and it's been amended many times since then. Most recently, it went through a major amendment in 2019 with Bill 108. You may have recalled at the time there was lots of news articles about it because it proposed major changes to the Development Charge Act, such as removing soft services from development charges, so things like libraries, parks and recreation services. Thankfully, the province has walked back on most of their changes. So we're back to kind of the more standard development charge process that we kind of knew and loved before. So we can collect development charges against new residential and non-residential buildings, expansions of non-residential buildings. So let's say I have a commercial storefront, I put on a big addition, you can collect development charges for that addition. Or if we convert buildings. So again, let's pretend I own a factory and I convert it to trendy loft apartments. You could collect development charges against my trendy loft apartments. There are a number of statutory exemptions to development charges, so you cannot collect development charges against these types of buildings or developments based on the rules in the Act. So if I put an addition on my existing home, you cannot collect development charges for that. And then for certain types of additional units in existing and new dwellings, this is something that comes out of the regulations. And for secondary dwellings now, this is another new change to the Act, and this comes out of the need for more rental units. So think of places like Toronto where people are putting up alleyway homes and carriage homes and secondary, they're putting basically apartments in garages. There's new rules around what you collect for development charges for those types of units. And then for any industrial development, if they're not expanding by more than 50%, you cannot collect development charges against that. One thing to note is that you can also put in your own exemptions to development charges in your own bylaw. Many municipalities in this area don't collect development charges for non-residential development. They view this as an incentive. They tend not to have a lot of non-residential growth, period, so they're not essentially losing out on anything. And then they use it as a marketing ploy to say, come here, we don't have development charges. Other things that most municipalities exempt include places of worship, farm buildings, and then usually they include a clause that says, if something catastrophic happens to your home, like a fire, you can rebuild without paying development charges. Fair, right? So this slide summarizes the different types of projects that are eligible under development charges. It includes all your hard services. So when I say hard services, I mean your water, wastewater, stormwater, and road infrastructure, as well as other types of services like policing, ambulance, library, parks and recreation, but not the acquisition of park land. And then there's some new service types that have been added to the list in the last round of amendments to the Act, such as childcare services, bylaw enforcement, and emergency prepared services. You can now collect for through development charges. Only projects that are on this list or fit into the categories on this list are what you can collect for through development charges. So something like parking, you cannot collect for through development charges because it is not on this list. When I talk about capital cost in development charges has a very specific definition. It's defined in the Act. So we can collect capital costs through development charges that relate to acquiring land, provided it's not parkland. If we need to improve the land, if we need to build buildings or fix buildings, if we need to improve existing facilities, so that would include fleet, rolling stock, furniture and equipment, but not computer equipment. I don't know why that is specifically outlined as an exemption, as well as you can collect for materials for your library. If you need to undertake a study, so let's say you need to put in, again, a new well, you have to do an EA before you can do that well, you can collect for the EA required through development charges. And then if you had to borrow money to do any of these tasks, you can collect on the interest. So the Development Charge Act requires that councils indicate that they intend to ensure that the increase in need of service will be met and collected for through development charges. And this means, or this can be demonstrated by including the project in an official plan or a capital forecast or a motion from council that says, we intend to collect for this project through development charges. And the rationale behind this is that we want development charges to include projects that will be built. We don't want to include projects that are pie in the sky, wishes. They have to be projects that have a reasonable expectation of being built within, the near future, essentially. Another thing to keep in mind is that we cannot collect for an increase in need of service beyond what your existing level of service is. So developers are not going to pay for the gold level of service. If this is your level of service, you do not collect at this level. It's based on what the existing level of service is. And if you have excess capacity, so I'm just going to use some simple numbers because math is hard in the morning. Let's say you need a new well for 100 people, and you've got an existing well that still has room for 10 people in it. You can only collect for 90 people through development charges because you've got this existing 10 people capacity that's excess. Does that make sense to everybody? So how we calculate development charges is that we start with forecasting growth and development, because of course you need growth and development to support development charges. And then we look at, based on that growth and development, what your future needs may be in terms of capital works. And then once we have a list of capital works projects, we look at the costs. So we start out with the net costs, and then we subtract out any grants you may receive. So let's say you need a water tower and you get a grant for that. Great, but we have to subtract the amount of that grant off the net cost of that project. And then any portion of the project that benefits existing growth, we have to subtract that out as well. Because again, remember, development charges are only charged against future. So any portion of the project that benefits existing isn't eligible through development charges. So this slide shows a typical kind of calculation page for development charges. You'll see this in the back of our development charge background studies that we do. So this is for a water tower. That's apparently my bright shining example for today. This is actually comes right out of the Huron-Kinloss development charge background study. It's for the replacement of the existing standpipe in Lucknow. So they're replacing their standpipe. It's going to include capacity for future growth. The estimated project cost you can see at the top there is about $3 million. Unfortunately, they haven't received any grants, but you can see there's a line where we would subtract that out if they do. And then we figure out what the benefit to the existing population is. And with something like a water tower, it's pretty easy to do because we know 61% of the capacity of that water tower benefits the existing population. So that means we can collect 39% of that cost of that project from future growth. So in this example, it's about $1.2 million. We then split that out between residential growth and non-residential growth. And we get down to a residential development charge based on a per capita basis and a non-residential allocation based on a square foot or square meter rate. Most development charges are collected when a building permit is issued. There are some instances when you can collect development charges a little early. Typically, when you have a plan of subdivision signed, you get that agreement signed, you can collect for the hard services, so your water, wastewater, storm, and road. There are some new rules around rental, institutional, and nonprofit housing when you can collect development charges for those types of developments. So for rental and institutional developments, they have the ability or the option to pay for their development charges over an annual installment period of 6 years. And then for nonprofit housing, they can actually pay their development charges over 21 years, which kind of, I have no idea how any poor treasurer is supposed to keep track of that, but that's in the rules now. And then for those same types of developments, if they need a site plan or a zoning bylaw amendment, the amount their development charge is the day they submit their application related to either the site plan or the zoning bylaw. Sorry, my cat really wants to say hello to everybody. So when you collect development charges, the money you collect goes into development charge reserve accounts. And these are reserve accounts set up specifically for development charges, and you set them up for each category of development charge project you have. So you would have a development charge reserve account for sewage projects. You would have a development charge reserve account for your water. So then any money you collected is then divvied up into those different little piggy banks, and the money in those reserves is to be used only for development charge projects. If you were in a pinch, you could borrow from those funds, but you do have to pay them back with interest. So to implement a development charge bylaw, the first thing you need to do is start a development charge background study. And as I said, the first thing we do, start forecasting growth, and we look at projects. So we look at what projects are currently in development charges. Are the costs still reasonable? Are the assumptions made still reasonable? We would add in any new projects that the municipality or township is planning to service new growth, review costs, and then we do the calculation. Once we have the background study done, we have to have it available 60 days prior to the passage of the bylaw. It used to be 2 weeks, now it's 60 days. So the process of implementing development charges is a little bit longer. Once we calculate the development charges, we typically come back to staff and council and say, this is what we've calculated, and we'll ask staff to give us an idea of where they think they're going to set the development charges at. And we ask council to kind of give us a target, because we then have to have a public meeting. And it's really helpful if we know where council is kind of thinking in terms of where they're going to set the charges when we go to the public, because it gives the public the opportunity to provide feedback on where council is thinking. Council can then pass the development charge bylaw after that public meeting. We then issue a notice of passage, and then there's a 40-day appeal period after that bylaw has been passed. So in North Huron, you've had development charges since 2011. The last time we did a development charge background study was in 2016. And as I said previously, you have development charges for your different wards, and that has just worked out based on the different projects. So there's different development charges in Wingham, Blythe, and East Wawanosh. Currently, you only collect residential development charges, and your bylaw is set to expire on October 17th. Slide shows your current development charges for a single or semi-detached unit in Wingham, Blythe, and East Wawanosh. And again, here you can see we've got the sanitary project in Wingham, the water project in Blythe, and that's what makes the differences between the 3 different wards. At the time, council decided not to collect non-residential development charges back in 2016. As well, the original calculated charge for Wingham was around $8,000, and council at the time made a decision to cut the sewage DC in half for Wingham, and that brought the charge down to about $5,000. The Blythe and East Wawanosh charges were charged at the full calculated rate. So this slide shows the projects that are currently included in your development charges. They include the Northwest Trunk Sewer Replacement, that's the sewage project in Wingham, the Blythe Well, Public Works Facility, firefighter outfitting, there we go, parkland development, and then a number of studies. So some things to start mulling over, or just to kind of think about as we move through this process. Councils have the ability or option to phase in development charges if there's a significant change in your development charges. Some municipalities or townships decide to phase in that change. It's an option. You don't have to. There's no rules requiring you to do so. If there's any specific exemptions you want, or if there's any discounts, you have the option to discount certain types of developments from their development charges. So again, where I live here in Huron-Kinloss, they offer a discount for retirement lodge development charges, because they want, there was a point in time where they really wanted to kind of encourage that type of development. So they thought a way of doing that would be to offer a discount on the development charges. But of course, keep in mind, when you offer that discount, you're not collecting the full development charge amount, and what's left over has to come from somewhere else. And the only somewhere else it can come from is your existing tax base. I often include, what the development charges are in your neighboring municipalities as part of this presentation, but I do include a bit of a warning with it, because remember, as I said, development charges are based on the projects that the municipality is undertaking to service future growth. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's truly based on what they're doing to service growth. So you may have a municipality that had very, very low development charges, and then they'll jump up because they're doing some big, say, sewage treatment plant expansion project. So, before we get too far into being Wilson from Home Improvement and peeking over the fence, just keep that little caution in mind that it's, absolutely based on what they're doing. It's not a game. It's, not Well, if they charge that, we're going to charge this. So Kincardine has a development charge for a single detached unit currently of about $14,000. They're doing a lot of major infrastructure projects in town right now. I put up 3 of the development charge areas in Huron-Kinloss. So Ripley, Lucknow, both around $4,000, $4,500. And then you see Finley Street in Ripley at $58,000. That's not a typo. I will explain that number. It seems probably a little bonkers off the start, but Finley Street was an unopened road in the village of Ripley. The township decided to open it, so they did the EA. They put in the road, put in the sewers, put in the water, put in the stormwater. There's only development on one side of the street, and it's a very short little street. So that represents the full cost of recouping the cost of installing all those services for a limited number of new homes. So that's why that development charge is so high. It really just reflects the cost of servicing. So those people are essentially, through their development charges, paying for their new road, new sewer, new water connection, and new storm sewer. Goderich, just a little over $2,000, and that again reflects, what that municipality is doing in terms of infrastructure projects. If we think, compare Kincardine and Goderich, Goderich doesn't have any big wastewater projects on the go. They're not doing any big water projects. So that's, really what has driven or keeps their development charge so low. In Exeter, just a little over $4,000. Your neighbors to the east in North Perth, their municipal-wide development charge is about $13,500. And then if you're in an area that has water and wastewater services, so Listowel or Atwood, they're up around the $19,000 for a single detached unit. And then in the different villages in Bluewater, they range anywhere from a little over $7,000 to just under $10,000. And again, the differences between the villages in Bluewater represent the different projects that are being done in those different areas. So the community benefits charge is something that was first introduced out of Bill 108. It is intended to replace Section 37 of the Planning Act, which, if you're not familiar with the Planning Act, deals with height and density bonusing. Originally, CBCs were going to be used to collect for all soft services. They were going to take them out of development charges, put them into these CBCs. They've walked back on that. We can now collect for soft services through development charges. So you can collect CBCs for services that are no longer applicable to development charges, or if you're not collecting for a service through development charges. So you're not allowed to double dip. So if you say have library services in your development charges, you can't collect for the same library services through CBCs. The kicker when it comes to community benefit charges is that they're only applicable to developments of a building with more than 5 stories, building with more than one residential unit. And you also cannot collect them against any long-term care homes, retirement homes, post-secondary institutions, hospices, or nonprofit housing. So they're really geared towards high density type development. It's really set up more for larger urban centers that have big towers. Also, something to keep in mind with CBCs is that the max you can collect is 4% of the land value. So again, I'm just going to use a simple math example here. So let's say I have a piece of land that's worth $100,000 and I'm going to build a 6-story apartment on it. Your CBC charge says, you collect $5,000, but because the value of my land is only $100,000, you can only collect $4,000 from me because you're capped at 4% of the land value. Okay. Another requirement of CBCs is that you'll have to spend or allocate 60% of the money on an annual basis. The province has yet to define what allocate means. If it's as simple as just saying, oh, we're going to spend it on this, that's one thing, but nobody really knows what allocate means yet. But if you have to do that on an annual basis, that means you have to turn the money over a lot quicker than development charges. Similar to development charges, before you implement CBCs, you have to have a CBC background study or strategy done. And it's very similar to a development charge background study, where you have to forecast growth and look at what existing needs you have and what future needs there will be and excess capacity, and also go through a similar public consultation process. For most of the municipalities we work in, we really don't see these as being very useful. Or that the cost to do these studies really doesn't end up benefiting the municipalities in a very meaningful way, because we can collect for soft services through development charges. So let's say I put up my 6-story apartment building, you can still collect development charges from me. Also, the cost of implementing a CBC strategy and bylaw really isn't realized if you don't have a lot of high density development. The requirement to spend 60% of the funds on an annual basis, again, if you don't have a lot of high density growth, spending that little amount you have is going to be very difficult. And then the limit of the 4% land value might result in funding gaps depending on what value of projects are included in the CBCs. So in terms of next steps for the development charge side of things, we've been working with staff on on getting information that we need to start the development charge process. When we get the go ahead, we'll start the forecasting of growth and development and sit down with staff and have a brainstorming session on projects that could be included in the development charges, and also review the existing projects that are in there. So now I'll open it up to any questions.
Everybody's on mute.
Yeah, Councillor Faulkner, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Deputy Reeve. I'm just curious to, just with North Huron's kind of unique infrastructure connections with a cross-border services, can charges be placed for infrastructure that improves another municipality's expansion and growth?
So it's really difficult to recoup development charges from a different municipality, because typically we collect development charges at the time a building permit is issued, and the building permit would be issued in a different municipality, right?
Yes.
So there really isn't a good mechanism of saying, okay, well, this is our development charge for sewage. You're getting that service, but you live in that other municipality. So there really isn't a way to collect it. So it's not something that can really be utilized on a cross-boundary issue.
So there's no benefit to a municipality by having the reserves for expansion in another municipality. There's just no way of.
You could let's flip the example. So let's say you get service from another municipality. You can collect development charges against that service and then pay it to the municipality when they come and say, we need this amount for providing you that service. But generally, you would want that cross-boundary agreement to be in place before you do that.
Okay.
Councillor Van Henderson.
Yeah, we have a really old water tower that has a lot of capacity, but is not functional. Is there a possibility to collect development charges for a new one with the same or a smaller, how does that work?
So your existing water tower, let's just for simple numbers say it serves 1,000 people. I know it doesn't, it serves more, but if it serves 1,000 people and you put in a water tower that services 800 people, you cannot collect development charges for that project. If you put in a water tower that services 1,500 people, you could collect development charges against that extra 500 people.
Okay, thank you.
Reed Bailey.
Thank you, Deputy Reeve Sipes. Kevin Faulkner actually started. I have a few questions. So if I go through this and he's already asked, it's just because I've made a bit of a list here and it's kind of around the same thing. So my understanding is we spent, I'm going to say about $100,000, $50,000 in Carling Terrace to increase the water line, I believe it was, to the bottom of the hill so that when the Morris Turnberry commercial lot sells, we have the capacity to serve them. So could we have handed that $100,000, whatever it is, don't hold me to 100,000, cost over to Morris Turnberry and say, we didn't need this in Carling Terrace. We simply did this because of your future growth. Or do we eat that?
I'm not sure you'd be able to collect it through development charges.
So this again, the same thing happened in Blythe when we went over to Central here, and we had to put the water lines bigger, et cetera, so we didn't get paid there. Keep in back to the Mine Council that when that does not get paid by somebody else, North Huron residents pay for it. More importantly, in this case, Blythe and Wingham water reserves are getting eaten up to supply our neighbor who becomes our competitor for growth. So will the study, when you do your study then for us, will you be including things like right now the welding shop just up from me here, they're doubling their capacity, which means they will need double the amount of water, so that we're in a situation where when we do our growth, we don't get caught off guard with having a pipe half the size. At the same time, we're not getting paid to have it the twice as large, but I mean, it would only make common sense to make it twice as large. Do you take that into consideration?
Just so I'm clear on, is this by crossing a boundary or, okay. Something we can look at in the development charge study. I'm not sure we would include it in the development charges because I'm not sure we would be able to collect for it from that other municipality.
Courtney, just so you understand, I would say 75% of our growth up until the last couple of years, maybe 90% of our growth is outside our borders, and we have supplied the water and sewer, and we have had contracts or agreements with them. And we're right now going through another agreement that we're not talking about. So my understanding, though, is if we have an agreement with them, we could put that in the agreement. It would be to everybody's advantage to have part of their building development money come towards us to pay for the sewer and water. I'm not sure if Morris Turnberry or Central Huron, we're talking about two locations, folks, have development charges in those areas. Okay, they don't. Okay, and we already touched on the new standpipe. We've touched on the other one. I think that's about it for me. Thank you. So we could, but at the end of the day, if we could make an agreement, if they're charging developments, they could hand over that portion of the development to help us for the cost of running larger piping, et cetera, in our area so that they have the services.
Potentially.
Yes,
yeah, I'll have to dive into it a little deeper.
Thank you very kindly.
Courtney, I have a question. You talked about how the development charges need to be available for 60 days, and then there's also a 40-day appeal period.
Yep.
Does that mean the appeal period has, so because you have to have a development charges bylaw in effect before the other one cancels,
mm-hmm.
Does that mean the bylaw that we sign has to be through the appeal period before October 17th, or is it it has to be signed by October 17th, and then the 40-day appeal period can be after that date?
You got it. So you pass your bylaw ahead of October 17th, and it goes into effect the minute you pass it, and then that starts the clock on the 40-day appeal period. If that 40-day appeal period is, it doesn't matter. Your old bylaw is already dead. So
So my question is from against it. Sorry, Councillor Van Arsdale, I see your hand. I just follow up question here. Who are they appealing to is my question. Are they appealing to the Ontario Municipal Board, or who are they appealing to as it relates to municipal charges or development charges? Like, who are they appealing to?
great question. You would appeal to the LPAT, so formerly the Ontario Municipal Board, now the Land Appeal Tribunal Board, is where that appeal goes to.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Van Henderson, you had a question?
Yes, you were talking about area-specific development charges. Could you develop an area-specific development charges for out-of-boundary development? Or
I'm not sure you could do that. I'll have to look into that one a little deeper into the act itself.
okay,
I haven't come
thank you.
across that one yet.
No, but every situation is unique, eh?
Yep, every place is its own special little place.
We got staff. The treasurer would like to ask a question. Donna?
Okay, thank you, Deputy Reeves Sipe. So Lisa, a couple of things I just wanted to talk about. First off is when you're talking about the appeal period, the one thing that is that we did in the last processes to avoid some of the appeals is that we had a meeting specifically with the developers before the bylaw was implemented to get their input. And so then that way we can address their concerns and take their comments into account before we run into the appeal period. And then that way we were able to not have as many of appeals. So that was just something we work with the development community, the developers, so that they're well aware of what we're doing and what we're charging for well ahead of time so that they can be part of the process. And again, Lisa outlined for you that it's important not to try to compare to other municipalities because you can't do that. It's completely apples to oranges. It's all based on what you're doing. And so at BM Ross, the standpipe, we've had a lot of discussion on the standpipe, and that is one of the projects that we're definitely going to be talking about. So I've already talked to Lisa about that, and the folks at BM Ross who are working on the standpipe will definitely be calculating how much of the new standpipe is related to growth. And then we will, if any, I don't know that, I haven't seen the information yet. So once we get that information, of course, we'll be discussing that with you at that point. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that, again, one of your bigger decisions is to whether or not to charge the commercial and industrial properties this go round, because as you know, the last two times we didn't, and as Lisa was saying, a lot of municipalities don't charge industrial commercial. So when Lisa was talking about, a store expansion or something, that would only be pertaining to if you had commercial charges. So just to clarify on that. And so then the other thing is for growth, Lisa. In the past, as everyone has mentioned, we haven't had a lot of growth. But now, right at the moment, fortunately, we do have a lot of growth, but we have a lot of growth in the hopper, which we're not 100% sure if everything that people are currently inquiring about came to fruition, then we would have a lot of growth. But we don't know today whether all this growth will actually go ahead. And some of it's confidential. So I just wanted to know, how does all of that potential growth that's in discussions with council be worked into this?
So when we develop our forecasts, we look at your historical growth. So how many building permits you've issued, but we also look at what's available in terms of development and what's on the books for development in terms of what's approved and then what's in talks. And we look at how that may impact future growth. And we typically use growth forecasts that look at 10 years and 20 and 25 years. So those, developments that are in talks are probably more of your long-term growth, and we would incorporate that into the longer-term growth trends.
Okay. And then, of course, Hutton Heights, as Councillor Van Hittersum, she was talking about the area specific. So if we go forward with Hutton Heights, this would be the first time, as we've said before, all the wards pay the same base rate, if you will, for development charges. And then Blythe has the extra charge for the Blythe well, and Wingham has the extra charge for the northwest trunk. But the difference would now be for the East Wawanosh ward, the Belgrave development, if I'm understanding correctly, development in Belgrave would not pay for the Hutton Heights development charge if we put that in. So I just wanted to make sure council was aware that that will be kind of our first change, where it's development specific. We haven't had that before. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that that would be something new for us as we move forward. So thank you. Those were the comments. Oh, the last comment I wanted to make was on daycare. So daycare is now a new eligible one, and council has been discussing about daycare in Blythe. And so we'll definitely want to have that on our project discussion list, because again, something like that has not been eligible before. And so it's going to be new for us as well. So we will capture that one as well. So what I envision for council is that staff will start brainstorming, which we already have been with Lisa and her group, but then definitely we'll have council involved in all of that to make sure that your projects or things that you're thinking about, that we certainly will give them good discussion as well. But we'll come to you with a starting list of projects, and then we'll get council's input on those, and then also any of your expanded ideas. So that's part of the next steps that Lisa was talking about. So thank you.
Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Deputy Reeve. The charges, or the development charges, are traditionally for traditional services, water, sewers, water towers and such. Has there ever been a development charge or the ability to have a development charge on new services, say technology?
No, that's a great question. There has never been development charges or the ability to include things like broadband internet in development charges. And unfortunately, the way the Act is written, that's not something we can include, because only the things that are on the list in the Act are things that can be included.
So if a municipality had to put up a tower to service a gray area that no servicing would be done, that couldn't be put into a project.
Nope, sorry.
Councillor Van Hittersum.
Thank you, Deputy Reeve. Does that also count for solar panels and windmills?
You can collect development charges against solar power or solar panels, pardon me, and windmills. So in Lambton Shores, they collect development charges against windmills.
Is there any other questions of council or staff? Okay, Lisa, thank you very much.
Oh, was there
sorry.
maybe one question? I saw somebody's hand.
Oh, sorry, Rick, I can't see you. Sorry, Rick, I can't see you on the screen, so I apologize. Go ahead, Councillor McBurney.
It was Kirk.
It's Kirk.
Okay, Kirk, I can't see you either. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you to Deputy Reeves site. Thank you for the presentation, Lisa. With respect to commercial buildings, and we are creating potentially 3 or 4 dwelling units above commercial. Can that be imposed into DCs when there's no existing residential above the commercial?
Yes, that would be eligible for development charges.
Okay. So following up, I just want to follow up one more on that. So if we created 4 additional dwelling units above a commercial space, and we looked at the DCs now on the Wingham ward, you would be looking at $3,259 per dwelling unit.
Yeah, I've got a copy of the bylaw up on my screen here, and I'm just scrolling through to the page at the end with the charges. And of course, it crashed.
Right now, I'm running off the 2021 chart.
Yeah, so it would be 4 times whatever the amount for a apartment is.
Okay.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Deputy Reeve. To Lisa, so if we charge a DC to a new residential area, say Hutton Heights, for instance, whatever that cost would be, or the charge would be, we still tag on the standard ones that everybody else pays?
Yep,
Like that's just a no-brainer there, right?
Yep, so they would still pay for firefighter outfitting, the public works facility, and the administration. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any other councillor or staff member that I can't see, which I'm not sure if there is any, that has questions or comments as it relates to the presentation of development charges? Not seeing any. Lisa, thank you very much for your information. Staff, I am assuming that something will be coming back for a future council meeting to discuss the projects and stuff. So we'll move away from that right now. Okay. So
thank you, everyone. Take care and stay dry out there.
So I do have a motion on the recommended motion that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby receives a presentation from Lisa Courtney, BM Ross and Associates Limited, dated March 26, 2021, regarding development charges 101 for information purposes. And further, that Council directs staff to proceed with the next steps to update the Township of North Huron development charges in 2021 at a cost of $19,500 plus HST. And further, that the cost of development charges update be recovered through the development charges. Do I have a mover for that proposed motion?
I'll move that, Kevin.
Councillor Faulkner moves it. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Palmer seconds. Any further questions or comments as it relates to the development charges and that motion that's on the floor? Not seeing any. Carson, go ahead with the roll, please.
Thank you, Deputy Reeves site. So Councillor Hefford,
Yes.
Councillor Van Hitterson,
Yes.
Councillor Palmer,
Yes.
Councillor McBurney,
Yes.
Councillor Falconer,
Yes.
Deputy Reeves site, and Reeve Bailey. So that motion carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Clerk. Moving on to the closed session. and reporting out. So I do have a motion that the council, a proposed motion that the council of the Township of North Huron hereby proceeds at 10:01 a.m. to an in-camera session closed to the public to discuss the following: labor relations and employee negotiations, which relates to an updated human resources policy manual. Do I have a mover for that motion? I have Councillor Van Hittersum moving. Do I have a seconder? I think that was Councillor McBurney seconding. Any comments? Carson, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Reeve-Sipe. So Councillor Van Hittersum,
Yes.
Councillor Palmer,
Yes.
Councillor McBurney,
Yes.
Councillor Falconer,
Yes.
Councillor Heffer,
Yes.
Deputy Reeve-Sipe,
Yes.
and Reeve Bailey. Oh, so Reeve Bailey's absent there. So that motion carries 6-0. So now we'll switch over to the closed session meeting.
Okay.